The late-night call from my mother was the last thing I expected after 6 months of deafening silence. There I was, Caitlin Wilson, 28 years old, and abandoned by my own parents, when a drunk driver shattered both my body and my life. While I struggled with medical bills and the threat of homelessness, they poured everything into my brother Ethan's new business venture. Their golden child, their future. Not me, never me. But now, as my phone illuminated the darkness of my tiny studio apartment, my mother's voice cracked with desperation. Ethan had been arrested. They needed my help, my legal expertise, my connections. I gripped the phone tighter, torn between vindication and the stubborn ache of family loyalty that refused to die. Growing up in Westfield, Ohio, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, Linda and Thomas Wilson, had respectable jobs, a nice 4-bedroom colonial, in a good school district and 2 healthy children. But inside those walls, the truth was painfully different. From my earliest memories, it was clear that Ethan, 3 years my junior, was the center of our family universe. Christmas mornings told the story plainly. My presents were always practical, sensible, a backpack for school, educational books, maybe a modest bracelet. Ethan's gifts spilled out from under the tree in dazzling abundance. The latest gaming systems, expensive sports equipment, designer clothes. When I was 16, I received a second-hand laptop for schoolwork. That same year, my 13-year-old brother got a brand new dirt bike. "Your brother needs more encouragement," my mother would explain with a dismissive wave whenever I gathered the courage to question the disparity. "He's sensitive. You're the strong one, Caitlin. You'll be fine no matter what." Being the strong one meant I was expected to achieve excellence without recognition, while Ethan received praise for bare minimum effort. I earned straight, as through discipline and late nights studying. My parents attended exactly 2 of my high school academic award ceremonies. Meanwhile, they never missed a single one of Ethan's soccer games, even when he mostly sat on the bench. The pattern continued as we grew older. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through state college, graduating with a degree in legal studies with honors. My graduation day, my father announced they couldn't stay for dinner because Ethan had a fraternity event at his private university, which they fully funded along with his apartment. I pretended it didn't hurt, as I celebrated my achievement alone at a diner near campus. "We're so proud of you, honey," my mother said as they rushed to leave. "You've always been so independent. Ethan still needs our guidance." After college, I moved to Chicago, determined to build a life based on merit rather than favoritism. I secured a position as a paralegal at Davidson & Myers, a respected mid-sized law firm specializing in corporate litigation. For the first time, my hard work was recognized. My superiors praised my attention to detail. I made friends who valued me. I found an apartment in a decent neighborhood with big windows that let in morning light. I started believing I could forge my own path without my family's approval. I called my parents every Sunday out of obligation, brief conversations dominated by updates about Ethan's latest adventures or mishaps. He had dropped out of college by then, cycling through various get-rich-quick schemes that my parents unfailingly supported financially. Still, I maintained the connection, holding on to some childish hope that someday they might see me. 6 months ago, everything changed. I was driving home from work during a rainstorm when a drunk driver ran a red light, smashing into the driver's side of my car. I remember spinning the screech of metal, then searing pain before everything went black. I woke up in the hospital to a nightmare. My left leg was shattered, requiring multiple surgeries and months of recovery. My pelvis was fractured, 3 broken ribs, a concussion. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but as the fog of medication lifted, panic set in. My health insurance would cover only a portion of the mounting medical costs. I couldn't work. My savings would barely last 2 months. For the first time in my adult life, I truly needed help. With my phone propped against my hospital pillow, I called my parents. Surely now, in this genuine crisis, they would finally step up. "Mom, I've been in an accident," I said, my voice small and pained. "It's bad. I'm going to need help with medical bills and rent while I recover. The doctors say I'll need at least 3 months before I can work again." The silence on the line stretched until my mother cleared her throat. "Oh, Caitlin, what terrible timing. We've just committed all our available funds to Ethan's new business venture. It's a tech startup, very promising. We've even taken out a second mortgage to help him get started." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, I'm talking about basic survival. I could lose my apartment. I might not be able to afford physical therapy." "You've always been so resourceful, honey," she replied, her voice falsely bright. "Maybe you could ask friends to start one of those online fundraisers. Or perhaps your company has some sort of disability coverage. Could you and Dad at least come to Chicago? I need someone to help me when I'm discharged. I can't even walk." Another pause. "Well, the thing is, Ethan has his big investor meeting next week, and we promised to help him prepare. You understand how important this is for his future." I hung up shortly after, tears streaming down my face. The message was devastatingly clear. Even with my life in shambles, I still didn't matter enough. 3 days later, my father called with excuses about their tight finances and busy schedule. They sent a generic get-well card with a $50 check that wouldn't cover even 1 hour of physical therapy. As I lay alone in that sterile hospital room watching nurses come and go, a hollow realization settled in my chest. I truly had no family to count on. The parents who were supposed to love me unconditionally had abandoned me during the worst crisis of my life. I was completely and utterly on my own. The weeks after being discharged from the hospital were the darkest of my life. My small apartment, once my haven of independence, became a prison of pain and isolation. Simple tasks like showering or preparing food turned into excruciating ordeals that left me exhausted and in tears. The medical bills arrived with shocking regularity, each one thicker than the last, with bold red numbers that made my stomach twist. 2 weeks after returning home, still barely able to move without assistance, I received the first eviction warning. My rent was 15 days late. My landlord had been understanding about my accident but needed payment. I called my office to learn that my position couldn't be held indefinitely. They could offer 6 weeks of partial pay through their emergency policy, but after that, they would need to hire a replacement. "We really value your work, Caitlin," my supervisor said apologetically. "We hope you'll apply again when you're fully recovered." I hung up and stared at the ceiling, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely in such a short time. That evening, a soft knock interrupted my despair. My elderly neighbor, Marge, stood in the hallway holding a casserole dish. "Thought you might need some real food, honey," she said, taking in my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes. "My daughter told me about your accident. Been watching your place, noticed you haven't been out much." Marge became my unexpected lifeline. At 76, she moved slowly herself, but she checked on me daily, bringing homemade food and picking up my prescriptions. Without her kindness, I'm not sure how I would have survived those first weeks. She never asked for anything in return, waving away my tearful thanks. "Been alone myself since my Harold passed," she said simply. "Folks should help each other. That's all there is to it." Meanwhile, my financial situation grew increasingly desperate. I sold my television first, then my laptop, replacing it with a cheap second-hand model that barely functioned. My dining table, the antique bookshelf I'd splurged on, and finally my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only inheritance I'd received, all went to online resellers for fractions of their value. Each sale felt like another piece of my former life slipping away. With Marge's help, I applied for emergency assistance programs, but most had long waiting lists or strict eligibility requirements I didn't quite meet. The drunk driver who hit me had minimum insurance that barely covered a third of my medical expenses. My lawyer explained that suing for damages might eventually yield results, but it would take years' time I didn't have. 3 months after the accident, still walking with a cane and enduring constant pain, I faced reality. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. I found a tiny studio in a rundown building in a neighborhood I would have avoided before. The elevator worked sporadically, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' conversations, but the rent was half what I had been paying. Moving day was a study in humiliation. Marge had enlisted her grandson to help, and together they packed my few remaining possessions into his pickup truck. My new place was so small that boxes had to be stacked against the walls, creating narrow pathways through the studio. The bathroom door didn't close properly. At night, I could hear arguments from neighboring apartments and sirens from the street below. "It's just temporary," I whispered to myself that first night lying on a mattress on the floor. "Just until I get back on my feet." Physical therapy was another challenge. My insurance covered only 15 sessions, not nearly enough for the extensive rehabilitation I needed. The therapist gave me exercises to do at home, which I performed religiously, despite the pain, determined to regain my mobility and independence. With my savings depleted and bills continuing to arrive, I began searching for work I could do despite my limitations. I applied for dozens of positions, often hiding the extent of my injuries during phone interviews. Finally, a small legal office downtown offered me a receptionist position at just above minimum wage. The office was not wheelchair accessible, which meant painful trips up and down stairs on my cane, but I had no choice. I took the job, grateful for any income. My new workplace introduced me to Jessica, or Jess, the office manager, whose desk sat adjacent to my reception area. In her early 30s, with bright red hair and a sleeve of colorful tattoos, Jess noticed my struggle almost immediately. "Management's too cheap to install a proper ramp," she said during my first lunch break, pulling up a chair beside me. "Been telling them for years it's not just wrong, but probably illegal." "You hanging in there? Okay?" That simple question of genuine concern broke something open inside me. To my horror, I began crying right there in the break room. Instead of backing away awkwardly, Jess simply handed me a napkin and waited. When I finally composed myself, I gave her the condensed version of my situation. No family support, medical bills, the new apartment, the constant pain. "That's a raw deal," she said without pity, which I appreciated. "Listen, my cousin's a massage therapist in training, needs practice hours, might help with the pain, and she wouldn't charge you. Want me to connect you?" That was the beginning of a friendship that would prove vital to my recovery. Jess was straightforward, practical, and fiercely loyal once she decided you were worth her time. She organized an unofficial meal rotation among our coworkers, arranged rides to work on days when my pain was too severe for public transit, and never once made me feel like a charity case. Despite these small mercies, depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. One evening, scrolling through social media before bed, I saw a post from my mother. It showed my parents beaming proudly outside a storefront with a grand opening banner. The caption read, "So proud of our son Ethan's new business venture. Nothing makes parents happier than seeing their child succeed." I stared at their smiling faces, the familiar ache in my chest sharpening to something like rage. While I had been selling my possessions to pay for basic medical care, they had been celebrating my brother's latest scheme. I clicked on Ethan's profile and saw more photos. A lavish opening party, my brother in expensive new clothes, my father giving a toast with champagne glasses raised high. I shut down my phone and lay in the darkness, listening to the couple arguing above me and distant traffic sounds. The contrast between their reality and mine felt almost surreal. Had I done something terrible in a past life to deserve such abandonment, or was I simply less lovable than my brother? 4 months after the accident, as I was slowly regaining my strength, a thick cream envelope arrived in my mailbox. My cousin Amy was getting married in Indianapolis, just a 3-hour drive from Chicago. The invitation included a handwritten note. "I heard about your accident, Caitlin. Really hope you can make it. The whole family will be there. Miss you." Amy and I had been close as children before growing apart in adulthood. The thought of seeing my parents and brother at the wedding sent anxiety spiraling through me. I hadn't spoken to them since that initial hospital call. Yet something in me couldn't decline. Perhaps I needed to see them face to face to confirm that the abandonment had been real and not some pain medication-induced nightmare. "You sure about this?" Jess asked when I told her about the wedding. "Seems like it might be pouring salt in an open wound." "I need to go," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "If I don't, I'll always wonder if things could have been different." The night before the wedding, I borrowed a dress from Jess and practiced standing without my cane for short periods. In the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. I had lost weight and my face looked older with lines of pain etched around my mouth. But my eyes held something new, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Survival had changed me. The question was whether my family would even notice. The wedding venue was a renovated historic barn in rural Indiana, with fairy lights strung across wooden beams and wildflower centerpieces on rustic tables. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated its charm. Instead, I sat in my rental car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel and trying to calm my racing heart. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. 3 hours. Say hello, eat some cake, leave early. You never have to do it again. I had left my cane in the car, determined to walk in without visible evidence of my struggle. My leg throbbed in protest as I made my way across the gravel lot, but I focused on maintaining a normal gait. The pain would be worth it if I could face my family with dignity and tact. Inside, the ceremony was already finished, and guests mingled during the cocktail hour before dinner. I spotted my cousin Amy in her wedding dress surrounded by bridesmaids and made a mental note to congratulate her later. Right now, I was scanning the crowd for my parents, both dreading and needing the inevitable confrontation. I found them near the bar. My mother in a navy blue dress I'd never seen before, my father in a new suit. They were laughing with my Uncle Champagne, flutes in hand, looking carefree and happy. The sight of them enjoying themselves so completely while I'd been fighting for basic survival sent a wave of nausea through me. Taking a deep breath, I approached. "Mom, Dad." They turned, and for a moment, genuine surprise registered on their faces. Then my mother's expression shifted to something carefully neutral. "Caitlin, we didn't know if you'd make it. No hug. No how are you. Not even a comment about my appearance, which had changed dramatically since they'd last seen me." My father nodded stiffly. "You're looking better. Recovered then?" "Not entirely," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Still in physical therapy. Still have pain every day. Still dealing with medical bills." An uncomfortable silence fell. My mother glanced around as if looking for rescue. "Well, she finally said it's good you could come. Amy will be pleased." Before I could respond, my father brightened noticeably, looking over my shoulder. "Ethan, over here, son." And there he was, my younger brother, approaching with the confidence of someone who has never doubted his place in the world. Designer suit, expertly styled hair, the same charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. He faltered slightly when he saw me, then recovered with practiced ease. "Sis, wow, long time no see." He leaned in for a brief cologne-scented hug that barely made contact. "Heard about your accident. Rough break." "Yes, rough." I couldn't manage more than that without my voice breaking. My mother immediately launched into animated questions about Ethan's business, effectively pushing me to the periphery of the conversation. I stood there for several excruciating minutes watching my parents beam with pride as Ethan detailed his company's supposed early successes. "We always knew you had the entrepreneurial spirit," my father said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just needed the right opportunity. And we're so glad we could help you get started." "The investment is already paying off," Ethan assured them. "Just landed 2 major clients last week. You guys are practically business geniuses for getting in on the ground floor." I excused myself unnoticed by any of them and made my way to the open bar. The bartender handed me a glass of white wine that I took to an empty table in the corner. From this vantage point, I could observe my family in their natural habitat, lavishing attention on their golden child, while I sat alone, an outsider at a family gathering. They haven't changed a bit, have they? I looked up to see my Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister, sliding into the chair beside me. Unlike my mother, Aunt Susan had always been forthright to the point of bluntness. "Not even a little," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "Amy told me about your accident. Said she tried calling your parents to coordinate a family response, but they kept putting her off. Said you were handling it fine on your own." The confirmation of their deliberate inaction stung afresh. "That sounds about right. Never understood it," she continued, sipping her drink. "The way they favor that boy, especially now that he's dragging them into that questionable business of his." I frowned. "Questionable how?" Aunt Susan leaned closer. "You haven't heard. He's calling it financial services for seniors or some such nonsense, selling investment packages to retirees. Your father's old golf buddies, church friends, anyone with a nest egg they can target. Word is the returns he's promising are too good to be true. A server interrupted us, announcing that dinner was being served. I thanked Aunt Susan for the information and made my way to my assigned table, noting with a mixture of relief and hurt that I wasn't seated with my immediate family but with distant cousins I barely knew. Throughout dinner, I watched my parents and brother at the head table laughing and chatting with the bride and groom. Several times I caught my mother glancing in my direction, only to quickly look away when our eyes met. After the main course, my cousin Amy appeared beside my chair. "Caitlin, I'm so glad you came." Her genuine warmth was a balm after my parents' coldness. "How are you really doing? I've been so worried." "I'm surviving," I answered honestly. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm getting there." She squeezed my hand. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Ethan's business. Has anyone in the family told you what's really going on?" Before she could continue, the clinking of glasses announced it was time for toasts. Amy was called away, promising to find me later. I watched as my father stood up, champagne glass in hand, prepared to deliver what I assumed would be a toast to the bride and groom. Instead, he spent the first half of his speech praising Ethan's business acumen and service to the senior community, inviting any interested guests to speak with Ethan about secure investment opportunities. Only as an afterthought did he congratulate Amy and her new husband. Something in me snapped. The months of pain, abandonment, and struggle crystallized into a clear, cold rage. As applause followed my father's inappropriate toast, I found myself standing wine glass in hand. The room quieted as guests noticed curiosity on their faces. "I'd also like to say something," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "First, to Amy and David, congratulations on your beautiful wedding." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. My parents wore identical expressions of confusion, clearly wondering what I was doing. For those who don't know me, I'm Caitlin Wilson, Thomas and Linda's daughter, Ethan's older sister. 6 months ago, I was nearly killed by a drunk driver. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. I've had 4 surgeries. I lost my apartment and had to sell most of my possessions to pay medical bills. The room fell completely silent. I could see my mother's face draining of color. During all of this, my parents decided they couldn't help me because they had committed their resources to my brother's new business venture. The same business my father just invited you all to invest in. They didn't visit me in the hospital. They didn't help with my medical bills. They sent a $50 check and suggested I start a GoFundMe. Gasps and uncomfortable shifting came from several tables. My father half rose from his seat, but my mother put a restraining hand on his arm. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," I continued, looking directly at my parents now. "I'm telling you because family means being there for each other during the hard times. Real love isn't conditional on success or convenience. And investment opportunities that sound too good to be true usually are." I raised my glass. "To Amy and David, may your marriage be built on genuine love and mutual support, the kind that endures through both joy and hardship. Thank you." I sat down, hands shaking, but head held high. Around me, guests applauded, awkwardly exchanging glances. My father was on his feet immediately, face mottled with rage. "How dare you," he hissed loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "How dare you use this occasion to air your grievances and slander your brother's legitimate business?" "Thomas, please," my mother implored, clearly mortified by the public scene. "No, Linda, I won't have it." He pointed at me across the room. "This is exactly why we can't support you, Caitlin. You've always been selfish, always jealous of your brother's success. Don't bother coming back to family gatherings until you can be supportive instead of vindictive." The room was deathly quiet now, the celebration atmosphere completely evaporated. I stood again, surprisingly calm, despite the public denouncement. "I won't be back," I said clearly. "Not until there's acknowledgement of how deeply you've failed as parents. Not until there's genuine remorse. Enjoy your golden child and his business while you can." I walked out of the reception with as much dignity as my painful leg would allow, feeling dozens of eyes on my back. In the parking lot safely inside my rental car, I finally allowed the tears to come. But they weren't tears of sadness or rejection. They were tears of release. For the first time, I had spoken my truth publicly. I had named the dysfunction that had shaped my entire life. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be silenced again. The week after the wedding confrontation, I collapsed emotionally. The public standoff with my father, while liberating in the moment, had drained my last reserves of strength. I called in sick to work for 2 days, barely leaving my bed in the tiny studio apartment, reliving the cold fury in my father's eyes as he disowned me in front of our extended family. On the 3rd day, Jess appeared at my door with coffee and bagels. "You're not answering texts. That's not like you," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. She took one look at my unwashed hair and red-rimmed eyes and set down the food. "Okay, talk." I told her everything, the words pouring out in a jumbled torrent. The wedding, my parents' cold reception, the revelations about Ethan's business, my public speech and my father's furious response. "So that's it," I concluded, staring down at my cold coffee. "I've officially been cut off from my family. Not that I had much of a relationship with them anyway." Jess was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You know, this isn't about you, right? Their behavior, their choices, they reflect on them, not you. Logically, I know that. But there's this voice inside me that keeps asking what's wrong with me, why I wasn't enough." "Nothing's wrong with you. But something is wrong with how you're handling this," Jess said bluntly. "You need actual help, Caitlin. Not just a friend bringing bagels, professional help." She was right, of course. The accident, the abandonment, the confrontation, it was too much to process alone. That afternoon, Jess helped me research affordable mental health resources, eventually finding a community center offering therapy on a sliding scale based on income. My first session with Dr. Powell was awkward. I'd never talked to a therapist before and found myself defensive, minimizing my pain. "It seems like you've been the strong one for so long that you don't know how to acknowledge when you're not okay," she observed during our second session. Being strong was the only value I had in my family, I admitted. If I wasn't the responsible, independent one, I wasn't anything. And now I don't know who I am. Over the following weeks, therapy became my anchor. Dr. Powell helped me identify the patterns of family dynamics that had shaped my self-worth and expectations. We worked on boundaries, on grieving the parents I wished I had versus accepting the ones I actually got. Meanwhile, I threw myself into rebuilding my career. My receptionist job barely covered rent and basic expenses, leaving nothing for my ongoing medical bills. I researched paralegal certification programs, discovering an online option that would allow me to study while continuing to work. "It's going to be tight financially," I told Dr. Powell during a session. "But if I can get certified, I can apply for better positions. Maybe even at my old firm eventually." "You're focusing on what you can control," she noted. "That's healthy. Just make sure you're also allowing yourself time to heal physically and emotionally." Finding that balance wasn't easy. Some days the pain in my leg was so severe I could barely focus on work, let alone additional studies. But the structure and forward momentum kept the despair at bay. Each small achievement, completing an assignment, managing a full day without pain medication, cooking a proper meal instead of relying on ramen noodles, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. 3 months after the wedding confrontation, I received an unexpected email from the senior partner at Davidson and Myers, my former employer. "We've been following your progress through mutual connections," he wrote. "Your dedication to continuing your legal education despite significant challenges speaks volumes about your character. We currently have an opening for a part-time paralegal that might suit your situation while you complete your certification. The position offers flexibility regarding medical appointments and some remote work options. Please contact me if you're interested in discussing further." I stared at the screen, hardly believing what I was reading. Later, I learned that my former supervisor had kept tabs on me through Jess, who had strategically mentioned my paralegal studies to mutual acquaintances in the legal community. The job offer wasn't charity, the firm genuinely needed someone with my specific experience, but the accommodations for my ongoing recovery were a compassionate touch I hadn't expected in the competitive legal world. The new position came with health insurance benefits that covered my remaining physical therapy sessions and a slightly higher hourly rate than my receptionist job. For the first time since the accident, I could see a path forward that didn't involve constant financial panic. With this newfound stability, I was able to focus more on my emotional recovery. I joined a support group for accident survivors, finding solace in shared experiences. I reconnected with friends I'd withdrawn from during my darkest months. I even started volunteering one Saturday morning a month at a local community center, helping people navigate basic legal paperwork, a small way of paying forward the kindness I'd received. 6 months after the wedding, I was having coffee near the office when someone called my name. Looking up, I saw my cousin Amy approaching my table. "Caitlin, I thought that was you." She hesitated clearly, unsure of her welcome after the wedding drama. "Amy, hi. Please join me." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "How are you? How's married life?" She relaxed visibly, sliding into the seat. "It's good. Really good. I've been thinking about you, wanted to reach out, but wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from anyone in the family. You're about the only one I would want to hear from," I admitted. "I'm sorry if my speech caused problems at your wedding." Amy shook her head firmly. "Don't apologize. What Uncle Thomas said to you was horrible. Besides, you probably did some of the guests a favor." She lowered her voice. "That's actually part of why I wanted to talk to you. It's about Ethan's business." A knot formed in my stomach. What about it? After the wedding, some of the family started asking questions. My dad looked into those investment packages Ethan's been selling. "The numbers don't add up, Caitlin. The returns he's promising are impossible without some kind of illegal activity." "What kind of illegal activity?" Amy glanced around before continuing. "Dad thinks it's a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors, creating the illusion of legitimate profits. But worse, he's specifically targeting seniors, vulnerable people who don't understand financial markets, people like our grandparents' friends." I felt sick. "Are you sure? That's a serious accusation." "Not 100%, but the signs are there. High guaranteed returns, pressure tactics, no clear explanation of how the money is actually being invested." She hesitated. "And there's something else. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Linda have put everything into this. Their savings, retirement accounts, even a second mortgage on their house. If Ethan's business goes under or gets investigated, they'll lose everything I finished for her." After Amy left, I sat for a long time, turning over the information in my mind. If what she said was true, my brother wasn't just running a questionable business, he was committing fraud. And my parents, in their blind devotion to him, had potentially ruined their financial future. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of the whole situation. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. Why should I care if they faced consequences for their poor judgment? But another part, the part Dr. Powell had been helping me nurture, recognized that this reaction came from hurt rather than my true values. Innocent people could be harmed, elderly individuals who trusted my brother based on my parents' recommendation. People like Marge, my elderly neighbor who had shown me such kindness. That evening, I called Dr. Powell for an emergency session. "I don't know what to do," I confessed after explaining the situation. "If I report what I know, my brother could go to jail. My parents could lose everything. If I stay silent, innocent people could lose their life savings." "What matters most to you in this situation?" she asked. "Not what you think should matter, but what actually does." I considered the question carefully. Justice, protection of vulnerable people, and I guess, despite everything, I still care what happens to my parents. "Those are your values speaking," she noted. "Now you need to decide which action best aligns with those values." Over the next week, I did careful research. I read about investment fraud and its warning signs. I looked up the regulatory agencies that oversee financial services. Without directly accessing any confidential information, I used my legal research skills to determine whether the allegations about my brother's business had merit. Everything I discovered supported Amy's suspicions. The business structure, the marketing materials available online, the promised returns, all classic signs of a fraudulent investment scheme targeting seniors. With a heavy heart but clear conscience, I submitted an anonymous tip to the State Financial Regulatory Authority and the SEC, providing the specific details I had legally obtained. I didn't name my connection to Ethan, simply presented the concerning patterns I'd observed. Whether they would investigate was out of my hands, but I had done what I could to protect potential victims. That night I dreamed of my grandmother who had passed away when I was 15. In the dream she sat beside me on a park bench, her hands folded in her lap as they always had been. "You did right, Dream," Grandma said simply. "Sometimes love means hard choices." I woke with tears on my face, but a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I had acted according to my values rather than my wounds. It was the first time since the accident that I felt fully aligned with myself again. 3 weeks after submitting the tip, I was preparing dinner in my studio apartment when a news alert flashed on my phone. "Local financial advisor arrested on fraud charges," read the headline. With trembling fingers, I opened the article to see my brother's company name in the first paragraph. According to the report, authorities had raided the offices of Ethan's firm that morning, confiscating computers and files. Ethan had been arrested on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and financial exploitation of elderly persons. The article mentioned dozens of victims, primarily seniors, and estimated losses in the millions. I sank onto my couch, dinner forgotten. Despite having initiated the investigation, seeing the consequences in black and white text sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. Relief that vulnerable people would be protected from further harm. Vindication that my assessment had been correct, but also, unexpectedly, a deep sadness for my brother whose moral compass had become so skewed, and for my parents whose blind devotion would now cost them dearly. My phone began buzzing with text notifications. Distant relatives and family friends who had my number were reaching out, some asking if I knew anything, others expressing shock. I responded to none of them, needing time to process my own reaction. The next morning at work, Jess appeared at my desk, tablet in hand. "Have you seen this?" she asked, showing me a more detailed news article about the arrest. This one included quotes from investigators describing the fraud as particularly predatory, and mentioned that more arrests might be forthcoming as they examined who had knowledge of the scheme. "Do you think your parents could be implicated?" Jess asked quietly. I shook my head. They're not sophisticated enough financially to have understood what was happening. They just trusted Ethan blindly, as always. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their golden child had led them to financial ruin. That evening, my phone rang with my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. She called again 10 minutes later, and again. On the fourth attempt, I finally answered. "Caitlin." Her voice was barely recognizable, hoarse and frantic. "Caitlin, thank God. We've been trying to reach you all day." "I saw the news, Mom. It's a mistake. It has to be. Ethan wouldn't. He couldn't." She broke off, sobbing. "The police came to our house. They took his computer, his files. They interviewed us for hours. They think we were involved, Caitlin. They think we knew." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Of course not," she cried. "How could you even ask that? We thought he was helping people. He said he was helping them secure their retirement." I closed my eyes, picturing my mother's face, always so ready to believe the best of my brother. "What do you need from me, Mom?" "He's in jail, Caitlin. They've set bail at $500,000. We don't have that kind of money, especially now that they've frozen all the business accounts. His lawyer says he could face 20 years if convicted." The magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. My brother was facing serious federal charges. My parents were potentially facing financial ruin and the devastating realization that their son had committed major crimes. "I'm sorry, Mom. That's terrible. But I'm not sure what you think I can do." There was a pause then. My mother's voice returned, smaller now. "You work in law. You have connections. Maybe you could help find him a better lawyer, or speak to someone about reducing the bail, or character references. Anything, Caitlin. He's your brother. The plea struck me as surreal, after months of silence during my own crisis. Mom, do you hear yourself? 6 months ago, I called you from a hospital bed. I was injured alone, about to lose my apartment. You told me you couldn't help because all your resources were going to Ethan's business, the same business that was apparently defrauding elderly people. That was different, she protested weakly. How? How was it different? We thought the business was legitimate, an investment in his future, and my future wasn't worth investing in. The words came out before I could stop them, years of hurt, condensed into one simple question. My mother was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she whispered, "We need you, Caitlin. Your father is a mess. I don't know what to do. Please." Family needs to stick together during hard times. The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. Family needs to stick together during hard times. Where had that sentiment been when I was selling my possessions to pay medical bills? "I'll think about it," I said, finally unable to commit to more in that moment. "I need to process this, Mom." Of course, she said quickly, hope creeping into her voice. "Take all the time you need. Just please call us back soon. The preliminary hearing is next week." After hanging up, I sat in the dark of my apartment, listening to the now familiar sounds of my neighbors' lives through the thin walls. The call had unleashed a torrent of emotions I thought I'd worked through in therapy. The anger at their abandonment, the hurt of being less valued than my brother, the lingering desire, despite everything, for parental love and approval. But there was something else too, something new, a sense of power. For the first time in our family dynamic, they needed me more than I needed them. The realization wasn't satisfying in the way I might have once imagined. Instead, it left me with a profound responsibility. What would I do with this shift in power? Would I use it to hurt them as they had hurt me? Or would I find a path that honored my own healing while still showing compassion? I had no answers that night, but as I finally fell into an uneasy sleep, I knew that whatever I decided would define not just my relationship with my family going forward, but the person I was choosing to become in the wake of everything that had happened. For 3 days, I avoided making a decision about my mother's plea for help. By day, I focused intensely on work and my paralegal studies. By night, I oscillated between righteous anger, let them figure it out themselves, and guilt-laden obligation. "They're still your parents, and your brother is facing serious charges." Dr. Powell's voice echoed in my mind. "What matters most to you in this situation?" On the 4th day, I called Jess during my lunch break. "I need a reality check," I said, without preamble. "My mother wants me to help with my brother's legal situation. Part of me wants to tell them they're on their own, just like I was. But another part feels like that makes me as bad as them." Jess considered this. "What exactly do they want from you, Money?" "Connections. Advice. My brother's facing serious federal charges. They're overwhelmed. And what would helping them cost you? Not financially, but emotionally." It was the right question. I'd have to see them, talk to them, be involved in their lives again. "After they abandoned you during your crisis," Jess pointed out. "Yes, then this isn't about what's right or wrong in some absolute sense. It's about what you can live with, what lets you sleep at night knowing you acted in alignment with your own values, not theirs." After work, I called my therapist for an emergency session. "I keep thinking about what you said about values," I told Dr. Powell. "Justice is important to me. So is compassion. But self-respect matters too. Those values don't have to be in conflict," she suggested. "Is there a way to approach this situation that honors all three?" That evening, I sent a text to my mother. "I'll meet with you and Dad tomorrow. Carver's Cafe on Michigan Avenue. 7 p.m. Just the three of us." Her reply came instantly. "Thank you, Caitlin. We'll be there." I arrived at the cafe early, selecting a quiet corner table. The restaurant was moderately priced with simple decor, a deliberate choice on my part. Not so expensive that it would seem ostentatious given their financial concerns, not so casual that it diminished the seriousness of our conversation. My parents arrived together looking nothing like the confident, put-together couple I remembered. My father had lost weight, his face gaunt with stress. My mother's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. They scanned the restaurant anxiously, and I raised my hand slightly to catch their attention. "Caitlin," my mother said, as they approached, moving, as if to hug me, before stopping herself, uncertain of her welcome. "Thank you for meeting us." We ordered coffee, the ritual providing a momentary distraction from the tension. Once the server left, my father cleared his throat. "We appreciate you coming," he said stiffly. "As your mother probably told you, we're in a difficult situation with Ethan's legal troubles." "His arrest for fraud," I corrected, refusing to minimize what had happened. My father flinched but nodded. "Yes, the charges are serious. His court-appointed attorney seems overwhelmed by the case. We thought, given your experience in the legal field, I'm a paralegal dad, not a criminal defense attorney, and certainly not one qualified to handle federal fraud cases. But you must know people," my mother interjected. "Lawyers at your firm, someone who could take his case pro bono or at a reduced rate." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay centered. "Before we go any further, I need to say something. The last time I asked you for help when I was injured, and at risk of losing everything you told me, you couldn't spare any resources because you were investing in Ethan's business. The same business that was apparently defrauding elderly people." My father's face flushed. "We had no idea what was happening with the business. We thought it was legitimate." "That's not my point," I replied evenly. "Whether the business was legitimate or not, you chose to put all your resources there rather than helping your daughter during a life-threatening crisis. We always knew you'd land on your feet," my mother said weakly. "You've always been so capable." "I didn't land on my feet, Mom. I hit rock bottom. I lost my apartment. I sold everything I owned. I lived on cheap ramen for months. I had to take a job I was overqualified for because it was all I could physically manage. The only reason I survived was because of strangers and new friends who showed me more compassion than my own family did." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We made a mistake. We see that now. But surely you don't want Ethan to go to prison for 20 years over a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Dad, according to the news reports, Ethan systematically targeted elderly people and stole their life savings. That's not a mistake. That's a series of deliberate choices. He's still your brother," my mother pleaded. "Family should help family. Where was that sentiment when I called you from the hospital? Where was family helping family when I was doing physical therapy alone, when I couldn't even shower without pain?" My voice was steady despite the emotion behind the pain. "Words. For my entire life, there's been one set of rules for Ethan, and another for me. He gets unconditional support. I get you'll land on your feet. He makes horrible choices and gets rescued. I do everything right and get abandoned." My parents sat in stunned silence, perhaps truly hearing me for the first time. "I know exactly what Ethan did," I continued. "He created a Ponzi scheme, targeting vulnerable seniors. He used your social connections to establish credibility. He promised impossible returns. And when new investment money slowed down, it all fell apart as these schemes inevitably do." My father's face went pale. "How do you know all this?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because I've spent 6 months rebuilding my legal career, because I understand how fraud investigations work. Because unlike you, I did my research instead of blindly believing what I wanted to hear." My mother began to cry quietly, fumbling in her purse for a tissue. My father's expression hardened. "So that's it. You've invited us here, just to tell us you won't help, to punish us for not being there when you needed us." "No," I said quietly. "I invited you here to establish the truth of what happened, to make sure we're all operating from reality, not convenient fictions." "And then," what he challenged. I took a sip of my coffee, organizing my thoughts. "I won't help Ethan. What he did was inexcusable. He stole from vulnerable people. People like my neighbor who helped me when you wouldn't. He deserves whatever legal consequences come his way. My mother's sobs grew louder, drawing glances from nearby tables. However, I continued, I will help you. They both looked up, confusion evident on their faces. I can't connect you with criminal defense attorneys. That's not my area. But I can help you understand what's happening with the legal process. I can explain your options for protecting whatever assets haven't been tied to Ethan's business. I can direct you to resources for families of those accused of financial crimes. Why would you do that? My father asked, suspicion in his voice. After everything you just said, because I'm not you, I replied simply. I don't measure love by convenience or success. Because despite everything, you're still my parents. And because helping you navigate this situation doesn't mean I've forgotten or excused your abandonment. It means I'm choosing to act according to my values, not my hurt. My mother reached across the table tentatively, her fingers stopping just short of touching my hand. We don't deserve your help. No, I agreed. You don't. But I'm offering it anyway with conditions. First, I need acknowledgement of how deeply you failed me. Not excuses, not justifications. Real recognition of the harm you caused. My father started to speak, but I held up my hand. Second, I need genuine remorse. Not because you need something from me now, but because you understand how wrong your actions were. I looked between them, gauging their reactions. And third, I need boundaries. This isn't a return to the old family dynamic. This is me as an adult, choosing to offer limited help to other adults in crisis. Nothing more. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decades of family history. Finally, my father spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for, he admitted. I've spent so long believing I was doing the right thing, being a good parent. To accept that I failed you so completely, then we have nothing more to discuss. I reached for my purse, preparing to leave. Wait, my mother said urgently. Please, I know we failed you. Her voice broke. When you called from the hospital, I told myself you would be fine because facing the alternative that you genuinely needed us and we were choosing not to be there was too painful. It was easier to believe you were strong enough to handle it alone than to admit we were prioritizing Ethan at your expense. Again, I settled back in my seat, listening. I'm sorry, she continued, tears flowing freely now. I'm so sorry, Caitlin. Not because we need your help now, but because you deserved better from us. Always. I looked to my father, who sat, rigid emotion working across his face. Dad. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. I've always been proud of you, he said finally. Too proud, maybe. Proud enough to convince myself you didn't need what every child needs. Parents. Who show up. Who choose them. Who put them first. He met my eyes directly. I failed you. We failed you. And I am deeply, profoundly sorry. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had imagined in the countless mental rehearsals of this moment. But it was honest. Perhaps the first truly honest exchange we had ever had as a family. Okay, I said quietly. Then here's what I can do. I outlined the practical assistance I could provide, explaining the federal charges Ethan faced. Helping them find a reputable attorney who might offer a payment plan, connecting them with financial advisors specializing in asset protection. For families in their situation. I won't bail him out, I said firmly. Literally or figuratively. But I can help you weather this storm with as much dignity and security as possible given the circumstances. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my mother asked hesitantly, Will we see you again? After this? I considered the question carefully. That depends on what happens next, on whether this conversation represents a real turning point or just a temporary change because you need something from me. I'm willing to find out, but cautiously. With boundaries. In the parking lot, we parted with awkward nods rather than hugs. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something I hadn't expected, a door cracked open to the possibility of a different kind of relationship. One based on truth rather than convenient fictions, on mutual respect rather than assigned roles. As I drove home, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was resolved, far from it, but because for the first time in my life, I had stood firmly in my truth while still extending compassion. I had broken the cycle of resentment without breaking myself in the process. It was, I realized, its own kind of victory. In the months that followed our confrontation at Carver's Cafe, my relationship with my parents evolved in ways I never could have predicted. True to my word, I helped them navigate the legal system without directly intervening in Ethan's case. I connected them with a public defender who specialized in financial crimes and explained each stage of the process in terms they could understand. The evidence against Ethan was overwhelming. Financial records witnessed testimonies from victims, even incriminating emails outlining his awareness that the investment returns he promised were impossible to deliver legitimately. Faced with a potential 20-year sentence, he agreed to a plea deal, accepting guilt on 3 of the most serious charges, in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. The day he entered his guilty plea, my parents sat in the courtroom, finally confronting the full reality of what their golden child had done. The prosecutor read statements from several victims, elderly people who had lost their retirement savings, a widower who could no longer afford his wife's nursing home care, a couple forced to sell their home of 40 years. My mother wept quietly throughout. My father sat rigid, his face ashen. I attended the sentencing hearing at my mother's request, sitting not beside them but in the same row, a physical representation of our current status, connected but with necessary distance. As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, my father turned to me. "You were right," he said simply, "about everything. We enabled this. All his life we taught him he could do whatever he wanted without consequences." It wasn't said with self-pity or to elicit sympathy. It was a clean acknowledgement of a painful truth, the kind of honesty that had been missing from our family dynamic for decades. The financial aftermath was severe, but not as catastrophic as it might have been. I helped my parents consult with a financial advisor who specialized in asset protection. They were forced to sell their house, the one I'd grown up in, to settle debts and legal fees, moving into a small rental apartment. My father, who had been semi-retired, returned to full-time work at 63. My mother found a part-time job at a local library, her first employment in over 30 years. These changes, while difficult, seemed to spark something unexpected in both of them. Stripped of their previous identity as successful parents of a promising son, they began to discover who they were without the protective layers of denial and favoritism. 3 months after Ethan began serving his sentence, my father called me directly, not to ask for help but to share news. "I've started volunteering with a financial literacy program at the senior center," he told me, an unfamiliar note of purpose in his voice. "Teaching older folks how to recognize scams, protect their savings. Seems like the least I can do given everything." My mother, meanwhile, had joined a support group for parents of incarcerated adults. "It's helped me understand I'm not alone in missing the signs," she explained during one of our now monthly coffee meetings. "And that loving Ethan doesn't mean excusing what he did." As for my own life, the part-time position at Davidson and Myers expanded to full-time once I completed my paralegal certification. My supervisor, impressed by how I'd maintained my professional development despite personal challenges, recommended me for a senior paralegal role working directly with the litigation team. The position came with a significant salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and the professional respect I had worked so hard to earn. With my improved financial situation, I was able to move out of the tiny studio into a modest but comfortable 1-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. The simple pleasure of having separate living and sleeping spaces felt like an extraordinary luxury after months of cramped quarters. My physical recovery continued as well. Though I would always have some pain and limitations from the accident, regular physical therapy and proper medical care restored most of my mobility. I still used a cane occasionally, on particularly bad days, but increasingly it stayed in the closet. Perhaps the most meaningful development came 6 months after Ethan's sentencing, when I received a call from the district attorney's office. They were establishing a new program to provide support services to elderly victims of financial fraud and wanted my input given my legal background and personal connection to such a case. We need people who understand both the legal aspects and the emotional impact, the program coordinator explained. Would you be willing to volunteer as an advisor? Perhaps even speak at some of our workshops. I accepted immediately, finding unexpected healing in helping others navigate situations similar to what my family had caused. At my first workshop, an 82-year-old woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for explaining everything so clearly," she said, gripping my hand. "My nephew took most of my savings last year. I've been too ashamed to tell anyone." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I told her with complete conviction. "The person who betrayed your trust is the one who should feel shame, not you." As I spoke those words, I realized I was finally internalizing the same truth about my own situation. The abandonment I had experienced wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of my parents' limitations at that time. Nearly a year after my confrontation with my parents, we attempted our first family dinner since before my accident. My mother suggested a restaurant, but I countered with an invitation to my new apartment instead. Having them in my space on my terms felt symbolically important. The evening was awkward at times, with conversation occasionally lapsing into uncomfortable silence. We were still learning how to interact without the dysfunctional patterns that had defined us for so long. But there were moments of genuine connection, two small bridges being built across the chasm of past hurts. My father brought a housewarming gift, a set of wind chimes for my small balcony. "I remembered you always liked the ones we had at the lake house when you were little," he explained gruffly. My mother arrived with a photo album I hadn't seen before, filled with pictures of me throughout childhood, dance recitals, science fairs, graduation. "I've been going through everything since we downsized," she said. "Thought you might want these." As I flipped through the pages, seeing visual evidence that I had in fact been noticed and documented, even when it didn't feel that way, something softened inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, that would be a longer journey, but perhaps understanding. They had failed me profoundly and painfully, but they hadn't been villains in every moment of my life. Over dessert, my father asked about my volunteer work with the Fraud Victims Program, listening with genuine interest to my descriptions. "You found a way to create something meaningful from our family disaster," he observed. "That takes character." "I had to find purpose in it," I replied honestly. "Otherwise, the bitterness would have consumed me." My mother reached across the table hesitantly, placing her hand near mine without quite touching. "We're proud of you, Caitlin. Not because you're successful now, but because of who you are, who you've always been, even when we couldn't see it clearly." The words I had longed to hear for so much of my life landed differently than I had imagined. They were welcome, but they no longer defined my sense of self-worth. I had built that from the inside during my most difficult days, creating a foundation that no one else could take away. As they prepared to leave, my mother embraced me carefully, as if I might still break or reject the gesture. My father followed with an awkward but sincere hug of his own. "We'd like to do this again," he said, "if you're willing." "I'd like that," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. After they left, I sat on my balcony, listening to the new wind chimes, gently singing in the evening breeze. My journey over the past 18 months had been painful beyond measure at times. I had lost nearly everything: health, home, financial security, family. Yet standing on the other side of that devastation, I recognized that I had gained something precious as well: unshakable self-knowledge, resilience tested by fire, and the freedom that comes from building boundaries based on self-respect. The parents who had abandoned me during my darkest hour were now cautiously back in my life, but on completely different terms. Our new relationship wasn't perfect or fully healed. That would take years if it happened at all. But it was honest in a way our previous dynamic had never been. The painful confrontation at the restaurant had cleared away decades of pretense and denial, creating space for something authentic to potentially grow. Most importantly, I had discovered my own capacity for compassion without self-sacrifice. I could hold others accountable while still extending grace. I could maintain boundaries while offering help. I could acknowledge hurt without being defined by it. As the sky darkened over Chicago, I thought about all the unexpected turns that had led me to this moment of hard-won peace. The accident that shattered my body but ultimately freed me from unhealthy family patterns. The abandonment that forced me to build genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Even my brother's crimes, which had painfully but necessary exposed the dysfunction at our family's core. None of it had been easy. All of it had been necessary. The strongest people, my therapist had once told me, aren't those who never get knocked down. They're the ones who learn how to rise differently each time. I had risen differently, stronger in the broken places. Whatever challenges came next, I would face them, standing firmly in my own truth, extending compassion without compromising my worth. And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all, that true strength isn't found in never needing help or in pretending to be invulnerable. It's found in facing reality honestly, in setting boundaries with love, and in recognizing that your value never depended on someone else's ability to see it clearly. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who only seemed to value you when they needed something? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family challenges and building self-worth. And if you know someone who might find strength in Caitlin's journey, share this video with them. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the courage and compassion you bring to your own life story.